Abandoned at 78, a forgotten professor meets a therapy dog who sees what everyone else missed. Their connection will revolutionize elder care forever. Subscribe now. Where are you watching from? The late afternoon sunlight filtered weakly through the permanently dusty windows of Pinecrest Care Facility, casting long shadows across room 217. Dr. Howard Thornton sat motionless in his wheelchair, staring at the faded beige wall opposite his bed. At 78, his once commanding 6-foot frame had withered, shoulders permanently curved forward like a question mark asking what had happened to his life. His hands, still bearing calluses from decades of fieldwork, rested limply on the thin cotton blanket covering his legs. "Time for your meds, Mr. Thornton," called Nurse Deborah, not bothering to fully enter the room as she placed a small paper cup on his side table. She never addressed him as doctor, though his credentials hung in a simple frame on the wall, collecting dust like everything else in this forgotten corner of the Appalachian foothills. Howard didn't respond. 3 years in this place had taught him that his words meant little here. He'd been deposited at Pinecrest by his daughter Catherine after a minor stroke. "Just until you're stronger, Dad." But her visits had dwindled from weekly to monthly to holiday only to none at all. The last Christmas card remained unopened in his drawer. "They're bringing those therapy animals around today," Nurse Deborah added flatly. "Try not to get too excited." Her sarcasm hung in the air as she shuffled down the hallway. Howard sighed, reaching for his water glass with trembling fingers. The tremor wasn't from his condition, but from a quiet rage that occasionally still flickered within him. Rage at his body's betrayal. Rage at his family's abandonment. Rage at becoming invisible in a world he'd once enriched through his botanical research. Down the hallway, commotion broke the afternoon quiet. Howard heard enthusiastic voices, the shuffling of feet, and then something else. A deep, powerful bark followed by a woman's startled exclamation. "Duke, slow down. What's gotten into you?" Howard heard scrabbling claws on linoleum, a leash being dragged rather than leading, and suddenly his doorway was filled with the magnificent silhouette of a German shepherd. The dog stood perfectly still, amber eyes locked on Howard with uncanny intensity. "I'm so sorry," panted a young woman in a blue volunteer shirt, hurrying to catch up. "He's never done this before." "Duke, come," but the dog wouldn't budge. Instead, he padded deliberately into Howard's room, approached the wheelchair, and gently rested his muzzle on the old man's knee. Something cracked open in Howard's chest, something that had been sealed tight for 3 long years. He lifted his trembling hand and placed it on the dog's head. The fur was softer than he'd imagined. "Hello there," Howard whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "What's your hurry?" Duke's tail swept slowly back and forth, his eyes never leaving Howard's face. "That's unusual," said the handler, watching from the doorway. "I'm Melissa," with pause for healing. "Duke is one of our therapy dogs, but he's supposed to visit everyone, not pick favorites." Howard felt the warm weight of the dog's head on his knee, and something long dormant stirred within him. The corner of his mouth twitched upward, not quite a smile, but closer than anything in recent memory. "Perhaps," Howard said softly, his voice gaining strength with each word, "he knows something you don't." Melissa watched in fascination as the elderly man's posture straightened ever so slightly. "Maybe he does, sir. Maybe he does." For the next hour, Duke remained by Howard's side, occasionally shifting position but never leaving. Howard found himself speaking, haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, about the gardens he'd once tended, the expeditions he'd led, the plants he'd discovered. Melissa listened, captivated by this transformation. When it was finally time to leave, Duke refused to move. He planted his paws firmly on the floor, looking between Howard and Melissa with determined eyes. "I think," Howard said with a hint of his old professorial authority, "we might need to negotiate visiting rights." And for the first time in 3 years, Dr. Howard Thornton felt something that resembled hope. The following Tuesday, Howard found himself doing something he hadn't done in months, checking his reflection in the small bathroom mirror. His white hair, usually uncombed and limp, had been carefully brushed. He'd asked for a shave, surprising the aide who typically rushed through his morning routine. "You expecting company, Doc?" joked Reuben, the only staff member who acknowledged Howard's title. "Perhaps," Howard replied, adjusting the collar of his button-down shirt. navy blue instead of the facility-issued beige he normally wore. The therapy dog program returns today. Reuben raised an eyebrow. Never seen you this interested in anything around here before. Howard merely nodded, unwilling to admit how much the thought of Duke's return had occupied his mind over the past week. He'd even begun eating his full meals, recognizing the need for strength. When Melissa appeared in his doorway with Duke at her side, Howard felt an unfamiliar sensation in his cheeks. He was smiling. Dr. Thornton. Melissa greeted him, having researched the elderly resident after their first encounter. Duke has been restless all morning. I think he knew we were coming to see you. The German Shepherd approached Howard with deliberate steps, sitting directly beside the wheelchair and leaning his substantial weight against the old man's leg. Howard's hand immediately found the spot behind Duke's ear that had seemed to please him during their first meeting. You remembered, Melissa observed. I spent decades cataloging the minutiae of plant specimens, Howard replied. Some habits never fade. As they settled into conversation, Nurse Deborah appeared at the doorway, clipboard in hand. Her eyes narrowed at the scene. We need to change Mr. Thornton's linens. Dr. Thornton, Howard corrected quietly, his eyes still on Duke. What was that? Deborah's tone sharpened. Howard lifted his gaze, meeting hers directly. I said, Dr. Thornton. I work for that title. I've earned it. Deborah's mouth tightened. Well, doctor, your linens still need changing. The dog will have to leave. Before Melissa could begin gathering Duke's leash, the dog shifted position, moving to stand between Howard's wheelchair and the doorway. A low, barely audible rumble emanated from his chest. Melissa stared in confusion. Duke never does that. He's the gentlest. Fine. Deborah cut her off. We'll come back later. She departed with a dismissive wave. Fascinating, Howard murmured, scratching Duke gently behind the ears once more. He appears to be protective. I've never seen him behave this way, Melissa said, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. Do you mind if I document this? I'm completing my master's thesis in animal-assisted therapy, and this kind of specific bonding is exactly what my research focuses on. Howard nodded, feeling a forgotten sense of academic curiosity stir within him. Tell me about your research parameters. As Melissa outlined her study, Howard found himself offering suggestions, critiquing her methodology with the precision of a seasoned academic. Duke remained at his side, occasionally nudging Howard's hand when it stopped its rhythmic petting. You know, Melissa said thoughtfully, we've recently expanded our program. Duke could visit twice weekly if that would be agreeable to you. I believe, Howard said carefully, measuring each word. That would be most beneficial. For your research, of course. After Melissa and Duke departed, Howard wheeled himself to the window and, for the first time in months, pushed aside the heavy curtains. Sunlight flooded the room, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Outside, the facility's neglected grounds stretched toward the distant mountains. Mountains he had once roamed freely, collecting specimens and cataloging the rich botanical diversity of Appalachia. The sight of overgrown flower beds stirred something deep within him. He inhaled deeply, and though the window remained closed, he could almost smell the rich loam, the delicate fragrance of mountain laurel, the sharp tang of wild mint growing alongside the creek beds. Later that evening, Howard surprised the night staff by requesting paper and a pen. When asked why, he simply stated, I have observations to record. Under the harsh fluorescent light, his handwriting shaky but determined, Howard began a journal entry. Subject: Canis lupus familiaris, German Shepherd variant. Name: Duke. Observations: exhibits remarkable intuition and selective bonding behavior. Hypothesis: some connections transcend conventional understanding. Further study required. He paused, pen hovering over the paper, then added, Personal note: for the first time since arriving at this facility, I find myself looking forward to tomorrow. In his dreams that night, Howard wasn't confined to a wheelchair. He walked through sun-dappled forests with Duke at his side, the ground beneath his feet soft with decades of fallen leaves, the air fragrant with life. He awoke before dawn with tears on his cheeks and the certainty that something fundamental had changed. You're Howard Thornton, aren't you? The question came from a young woman in crisp blue scrubs, her ID badge identifying her as Amara Wilson, RN. She stood in Howard's doorway, a medical chart tucked under one arm, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Howard looked up from the botanical journal he'd requested from the facility's meager library. I am, he replied, marking his place with a finger. Though most here prefer the old man in 217. Amara stepped into the room, her warm brown eyes taking in the subtle changes. The open curtains, the journal, the small vase holding a sprig of mountain laurel that Melissa had brought during yesterday's visit with Duke. I started here last week, she explained. I recognized your name from one of my college textbooks. Medicinal Plants of Appalachia. You wrote that, didn't you? For a moment, Howard was speechless. It had been years since anyone had mentioned his work. Yes, he finally managed. Though that was nearly 2 decades ago. It was required reading in my ethnobotany elective, Amara continued, checking his vitals with efficient movements. Your work on traditional plant remedies used in rural communities helped bridge the gap between folk medicine and modern healthcare. I still have my copy, all marked up with notes. Howard felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Pride, perhaps, or validation. Most consider that work outdated now. Not in communities like this one, Amara countered, making notes in his chart. People here still use those remedies, especially those who can't afford prescription medications. Your research legitimized treatments that have been dismissed as superstition. Their conversation was interrupted by Duke's distinctive bark echoing down the hallway. Howard's face brightened visibly. I see your friend is here. Amara smiled, finishing her notes. The therapy dog program is doing wonders for many residents. Duke is special, Howard said simply. Moments later, Melissa appeared with Duke, who immediately crossed to Howard's side, tail wagging in greeting. Howard introduced Amara, explaining her familiarity with his work. Actually, Melissa said, I've been meaning to ask you about something, Dr. Thornton. Duke has been behaving unusually during our visits here. Not just with you, though your connection is strongest. He seems purposeful, almost like he's working. Working, Howard repeated, his hand resting on Duke's head. He insists on visiting certain residents, and he's remarkably gentle with them. With others, he maintains his distance. It's as though he's making assessments. Amara's eyes widened. There have been studies about dogs detecting health issues before they're clinically apparent. Changes in scent profiles can indicate disease progression. Howard looked down at Duke thoughtfully. So our friend here might be more perceptive than his human counterparts. No offense, Amara laughed, but it wouldn't be the first time. After they left, Howard found himself thinking about Duke's behavior. The dog's insistence on visiting him first, the protective stance when Nurse Deborah approached, the gentle but persistent presence. It all suggested something beyond random animal affection. That evening, Howard was wheeled to the common room for the monthly residents' meeting, an event he usually avoided. Director Philip Mercer, a thin man with cold eyes and a permanent frown, was announcing budget cuts. And so the animal therapy program will be suspended indefinitely, Mercer was saying, his tone suggesting the matter was closed for discussion. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the assembled residents. Howard felt his pulse quicken with a familiar anger. Excuse me, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. Heads turned in surprise. Howard never spoke at these meetings. Has the board approved this decision? Director Mercer's frown deepened. The financial considerations are secondary to therapeutic benefits, Howard interrupted. These programs show measurable improvements in resident well-being. They reduce medication needs and increase socialization. Mr. Thornton, Mercer began condescendingly. Dr. Thornton, Howard corrected firmly. And I'm familiar with institutional budgeting, having run a university department for 15 years. I would be interested to see the cost-benefit analysis that led to this particular cut. The room fell silent. Mercer's face flushed. I'll take your concerns under advisement, he managed before quickly moving to the next agenda item. After the meeting, several residents approached Howard, thanking him for speaking up. One elderly woman squeezed his shoulder as she passed. About time someone stood up to that penny pincher, she whispered. Later, Amara stopped by his room. I heard about what happened at the meeting, she said. The staff is talking about it. Howard shrugged. I merely asked a question. You did more than that, Amara replied. You reminded everyone that you still have a voice. She hesitated, then added, I've been doing some research on you, Dr. Thornton. Your contributions to ethnobotany and pharmacology were groundbreaking. What happened? Why did you stop publishing? Howard looked out the window at the deepening twilight. Life intervened, he said quietly. My wife's illness, my own health challenges, priorities shifted. But not your knowledge, Amara said. That's still there. Howard turned back to her, a spark of his old professorial intensity in his eyes. Did you know that 3 residents on this floor are receiving conflicting medications? I've observed the distribution routes. Mrs. Henderson in 220 is taking both digoxin and amiodarone, a potentially dangerous interaction. Amara's expression grew serious. How do you know this? Observation. Analysis. The tools of any scientist, Howard replied. Perhaps my remaining time can serve some purpose after all. That night, Howard dreamed again of walking through forests with Duke. But this time, they weren't alone. Behind them followed a line of people, the residents of Pinecrest, moving with renewed strength, gathering plants that glowed with healing energy. He awoke with the certainty that he wasn't just fighting for a therapy dog program. He was fighting for dignity, his own, and that of every forgotten elder whose wisdom remained untapped. Your vitals are improving, Dr. Thornton, Amara announced, reviewing his chart during her morning rounds. Blood pressure's down, heart rate's steadier. Whatever you're doing, keep it up. Howard nodded, his attention divided between Amara's report and the small notebook in which he'd been documenting medication inconsistencies throughout the facility. I've made some concerning observations regarding Mrs. Patel's prescription schedule, he said, turning the notebook toward her. She's receiving her Parkinson's medication at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., but given its 4-hour half-life, she experiences significant mobility challenges by mid-afternoon. Amara leaned closer, examining his meticulous notes. You've been tracking this for all the residents on this floor? Only those I can observe from common areas, Howard clarified. My mobility remains limited. This is, Amara hesitated, valuable information, but I'm not sure how to address it without overstepping my role. Perhaps Duke can assist, Howard suggested, a hint of mischief in his eyes. He's quite adept at creating distractions. As if summoned by his name, the German shepherd appeared in the doorway, Melissa close behind. Duke greeted Howard with his usual enthusiasm, then surprised both humans by turning to Amara and nudging her hand with his nose. He likes you, Melissa observed. That's a good sign. Howard watched the interaction with interest. Duke has excellent judgment. After exchanging pleasantries, Melissa mentioned they were exploring new areas of the facility for the therapy program. We're trying to expand our reach, she explained. Director Mercer reluctantly extended our program, but with conditions. We need to demonstrate broader impact. There's a garden, Amara said suddenly, behind the East Wing. It's overgrown now, but it was designed as a therapeutic space years ago. Howard's head snapped up. A garden? What kind? I'm not sure, Amara admitted. I only glimpsed it through a window. It looks like it's been neglected for years. We could check it out, Melissa suggested. Duke loves outdoor exploration. Howard felt a sudden urgency. I'd like to see it. The request hung in the air for a moment before Amara spoke. I could take you there after my shift ends. It's not on my rounds, but rules occasionally benefit from creative interpretation, Howard finished, the ghost of a smile playing at his lips. Later that afternoon, Amara wheeled Howard down seldom-used corridors, Duke and Melissa following behind. The dog seemed unusually excited, trotting ahead and looking back as if urging them to hurry. He knows where we're going, Melissa remarked. Impossible, Amara said. He's never been to this part of the facility. They reached a set of glass doors, clouded with years of grime. Beyond them lay what had once been a garden, now a tangle of overgrown plants, broken benches, and cracked pathways. Here we are, Amara announced, pushing against the reluctant door. It's not much to see anymore. But Howard wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on the wild profusion of green beyond the doors, his breathing quickening. Duke yanked at his leash, pulling Melissa toward the center of the garden where a weathered wooden structure, once a pergola, stood half-collapsed among vining plants. Duke, easy, Melissa called, struggling to maintain her grip. Howard leaned forward in his wheelchair. Let him go, he said urgently. He's trying to show us something. Melissa released the leash, and Duke bounded directly to the pergola, pawing at the ground near one of its posts. The humans followed, Howard directing Amara to push him through the overgrown path. What is it, boy? Howard asked as they reached the spot. Duke whined. continuing to paw at a patch of distinctive three-lobed leaves growing in abundance around the pergola's base. Howard drew in a sharp breath. "Ginseng," he whispered. "American ginseng. And it's thriving. Is that significant?" Melissa asked. "American ginseng is notoriously difficult to cultivate," Howard explained, his voice taking on the cadence of his teaching days. "It requires specific soil conditions, appropriate shade, and considerable patience. It's also increasingly rare in the wild due to overharvesting. This," he gestured to the robust patch, "this was planted deliberately by someone who knew exactly what they were doing." Amara looked around with new interest. "What else is here?" Howard's gaze swept the garden, identifying plants despite their overgrown state. Echinacea, valerian, St. John's wort. This isn't just any garden. It's a medicinal herb garden, designed with considerable expertise. "Could you have designed it?" Melissa asked quietly. Howard stared at her, then at the garden, fragments of memory stirring. I consulted on several healthcare facilities in this region before my retirement, but I don't recall this specific location." Duke had moved on, investigating other areas of the garden with purpose. He stopped at a stone marker half buried in weeds, barking once sharply. Amara made her way to the marker and brushed away years of accumulated debris. Her eyes widened as she read the weathered plaque. "Dr. Thornton," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "You need to see this." Howard directed his wheelchair toward her, navigating the uneven path with difficulty. When he reached the marker, he leaned forward to read the inscription. "Thornton Healing Garden, established 2002. Nature herself is the best physician." Hippocrates' silence fell over the group as Howard stared at his own name carved in stone. "I remember now," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "This was one of my last projects before Caroline, my wife, became ill. I designed it as a therapeutic space for residents and a teaching tool for staff." He looked around at the neglected space, years of work now buried under neglect. "It was beautiful once." Duke returned to Howard's side, resting his head on the old man's knee. "It could be again," Amara said quietly. Howard placed his hand on Duke's head, drawing strength from the dog's steady presence. "Perhaps," he murmured, an idea taking shape in his mind. "Perhaps it could." That evening, Howard drafted a proposal. His handwriting, shaky at first, grew steadier with each page as forgotten purpose flowed through him once more. The title at the top read, "Restoration and Integration of the Therapeutic Garden Program at Pinecrest Care Facility." As he wrote deep into the night, Howard felt more alive than he had in years. Outside his window, the moon illuminated the distant mountains, the same mountains that had once provided the native specimens for a garden that waited, resilient despite neglect, to be remembered. Director Mercer stared at the proposal on his desk, his thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "This is completely impractical, Dr. Thornton," he said, emphasizing the title with thinly veiled sarcasm. "The liability concerns alone are addressed on page 4, Howard interrupted calmly, as are the budgetary considerations, staffing requirements, and therapeutic benefits. I've included 37 peer-reviewed studies demonstrating the positive impact of horticultural therapy on geriatric populations." They sat in Mercer's meticulously organized office, Howard in his wheelchair facing the director's imposing desk. Amara stood by the door, having escorted Howard to the meeting, while Melissa sat beside him, Duke at their feet. "We simply don't have the resources," Mercer insisted, flipping through the proposal without truly reading it. "Maintaining a garden requires consistent care, which means additional personnel or community partnerships," Howard countered. "The local high school's agriculture program needs service projects. The university's ethnobotany department would jump at the research opportunity. I've already made preliminary contacts." Mercer's eyebrows shot up. "You've been making calls from this facility? Using our resources?" "I used my personal cell phone," Melissa interjected. "As a volunteer, I'm permitted to assist residents with outreach projects." Howard watched Mercer's jaw tighten. The man was cornered, and they both knew it. "The annual Family and Community Day is in 6 weeks, Howard continued, pressing his advantage. "Imagine the publicity value of unveiling a restored therapeutic garden, the only one of its kind in this region. The photographs alone would be worth considering." Mercer's expression shifted subtly at the mention of publicity. The board has been pushing for more community engagement. Precisely, Howard nodded. And as the original designer of the space, I'm uniquely positioned to oversee its restoration. At no additional salary, of course. The meeting ended with reluctant approval for a limited pilot program to assess the garden's viability. As they left the office, Amara squeezed Howard's shoulder. "That was masterful," she whispered. "You played him like a fiddle." "I merely spoke his language," Howard replied. "Administrators respond to metrics and public relations opportunities. The genuine therapeutic value is what matters to us." Over the next weeks, Howard found himself at the center of an unexpected flurry of activity. Word of the garden project spread throughout Pinecrest, drawing curious residents who had long ago surrendered to institutional monotony. "I grew up tending my grandmama's herb garden," shared Eliza Washington, an 83-year-old former schoolteacher who had barely spoken since arriving at the facility. She knew remedies for everything from croup to heartache. "My father was a landscaper," offered James Miller, a retired postal worker whose Parkinson's had robbed him of his hobbies, but not his knowledge. "I can sketch layout plans, if that would help." What had begun as Howard's personal crusade was evolving into a community renaissance. Residents who had spent years in isolated routines began gathering in the common room, sharing stories of gardens they had known, plants they had grown, remedies their families had passed down through generations. Amara helped coordinate assessment trips to the garden site, where Howard, now equipped with a motorized wheelchair that provided greater independence, directed preliminary clearing work. Student volunteers from the local high school arrived after classes, eager to earn community service hours. "It's like watching a different person," Melissa confided to Amara as they observed Howard explaining plant identification to a cluster of teenagers. "A month ago, he barely spoke." "Purpose is powerful medicine," Amara replied, "especially when combined with respect." Duke had become a fixture at the garden site, seemingly appointed as Howard's personal assistant. The dog exhibited an uncanny ability to locate specific plants among the overgrowth, leading volunteers to hidden patches of medicinal herbs that had survived years of neglect. "It's almost like he knows what we're looking for," remarked one student volunteer after Duke had led them to a thriving stand of wild ginger. "Perhaps he does," Howard said thoughtfully, watching the German Shepherd trot purposefully toward another corner of the garden. "Animals often perceive what we cannot." As the garden gradually emerged from years of neglect, so too did Howard's professional network resurface. Former colleagues responded to his outreach with enthusiasm. Donations of plants arrived from botanical gardens where his name still carried weight, and several local media outlets expressed interest in covering the project. Not everyone shared in the excitement, however. Nurse Deborah made her disapproval known through pointed comments and bureaucratic obstacles. "These residents are supposed to be resting, not digging in the dirt," she complained during a staff meeting. "And the tracking of soil through the facility is creating additional work for maintenance." The physical activity has reduced the need for sleep medications by 23% among participating residents, Amara countered, presenting data she and Howard had been carefully tracking. "And Mr. Miller hasn't required breakthrough pain medication since joining the garden crew." The facility's annual summer festival, typically a lackluster affair featuring plastic decorations and store-bought refreshments, became the target date for the garden's official unveiling. Howard worked tirelessly, dividing his energy between directing the physical restoration and developing educational materials about the plants and their traditional uses. "You're pushing yourself too hard," Amara cautioned, noting his fatigue during her morning rounds. "I'm merely living while I still can," Howard replied, his eyes bright despite the dark circles beneath them. "There's a difference between rest and surrender, my dear." The night before the festival, Howard wheeled himself to the garden alone, having convinced the night attendant to bend the rules just this once. Duke, who had taken to staying overnight at the facility during this busy period, accompanied him. Under the silver light of a nearly full moon, the restored garden held an ethereal beauty. Newly built raised beds contained organized plantings of medicinal herbs, their scents mingling in the night air. Restored pathways wound between garden rooms designed for different therapeutic purposes: sensory stimulation, physical therapy, quiet contemplation. Howard reached down to stroke Duke's fur, the dog a warm presence against his leg. "We did it, old friend," he murmured. against considerable odds. As if in response, Duke suddenly tensed, his ears alert. A moment later, Howard heard it too, the sound of approaching footsteps. "Dr. Thornton?" called a familiar voice. "I thought I might find you here." Howard turned to see Amara approaching, her scrubs exchanged for casual clothes, her expression troubled. "What brings you back at this hour?" Howard asked. "Information you need to have," she replied, sitting on a newly installed bench beside his wheelchair. "I was filing reports when I overheard Director Mercer on the phone. He's been diverting funds from the therapy programs, including the garden maintenance allocation, for years. That's why the garden was abandoned in the first place." Howard's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "Are you certain?" "I saw the records myself," Amara confirmed. "He's counting on tomorrow's event to secure a promotion to the corporate office, after which the garden will likely face budget constraints once again." Duke growled softly, as if understanding the threat to their work. Howard was silent for a long moment, gazing at the garden they had worked so hard to restore. Finally, he turned to Amara, determination hardening his features. "Then we must ensure tomorrow's event is memorable enough that abandoning this garden becomes impossible," he said, his voice taking on the crisp authority that had once commanded university lecture halls. "Tell me, Ms. Wilson, how are your acting skills?" Sunshine bathed the restored garden in golden light as Pinecrest's summer festival officially began. Colorful canopies dotted the grounds, each sheltering displays of medicinal plants, their traditional uses, and the scientific research supporting them. Residents, many dressed in their finest clothes, guided visitors through the transformed space with newfound energy and pride. Howard, wearing a pressed shirt and tie beneath a lightweight jacket, held court near the central pergola. Now fully restored and wrapped with flowering vines, it served as the garden's focal point. A small brass plaque had been polished to reveal its original dedication. "The plants here aren't just decorative," Howard explained to a cluster of attentive visitors. "Each was selected for specific therapeutic properties. The lavender and chamomile in this section promote relaxation and sleep quality, reducing dependence on pharmaceutical interventions." Among the crowd, Howard spotted Director Mercer leading a group of well-dressed individuals, board members, and potential donors, judging by their attentive expressions and expensive clothing. Mercer caught Howard's eye and nodded tightly, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Dr. Thornton," Mercer called, steering his group toward the pergola. "Perhaps you could share the history of this garden with our distinguished guests." Howard wheeled forward, extending his hand to the visitors. The garden was originally conceived as an integrated approach to elder care, combining traditional knowledge with modern therapeutic practices. After years of neglect, we've restored it to serve its intended purpose, proving that healing comes in many forms, not all of them packaged in plastic bottles. A tall woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward. "Fascinating approach. I'm Dr. Eleanor Wright, chair of the board. This garden seems quite extensive. What's the annual maintenance budget?" Before Mercer could intervene, Howard replied smoothly. According to facility records, the garden was allocated $60,000 annually for maintenance and staffing, funds that appear to have been redirected elsewhere for the past 5 years. Mercer's face flushed crimson. "I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all," came a clear voice from behind them. Amara approached, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a press badge and a photographer. "We've prepared detailed financial summaries for the board's review. Transparency is essential in healthcare administration. Wouldn't you agree, Director Mercer?" The reporter stepped forward. "Rebecca Chun, Appalachian Healthcare Quarterly. We're doing a feature on innovative approaches to elder care. This garden is extraordinary, especially considering it was abandoned for years despite being fully funded." Howard watched Mercer's composure crumble. This carefully orchestrated moment had been the centerpiece of Amara's acting skills suggestion, timing the revelation of financial discrepancies with maximum public exposure. "There's been a misallocation of resources that we're currently investigating," Dr. Wright said diplomatically, though her sharp gaze remained fixed on Mercer. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation privately." As the board members withdrew with Mercer in tow, Howard exchanged a subtle nod with Amara. Phase 1 of their plan had unfolded perfectly. The festival continued, drawing larger crowds than Pinecrest had seen in years. Local herbalists demonstrated traditional preparation methods. University students conducted interactive workshops, and residents shared their growing expertise with visitors. Duke remained at Howard's side throughout the day, occasionally leading children on botanical treasure hunts designed by Howard to engage younger visitors. The dog's intuitive understanding of human needs had become legendary among staff and residents alike. "He's not just a therapy dog," Howard overheard one aide explaining to visitors. "He's more like a four-legged nurse with an uncanny bedside manner." By late afternoon, the garden hosted an unexpected visitor. A woman in her mid-40s approached Howard hesitantly, her gaze moving between his face and a newspaper clipping in her hand. "Dr. Thornton?" she asked. "I'm Sophia Rivera. My grandmother was a patient here before she passed away last year." Howard nodded politely, waiting for her to continue. "I'm a journalist with the Regional Tribune," she explained. "I came to cover the festival, but—" She hesitated, then showed him the clipping. "I recognized your name. You treated my grandmother years ago in a clinical trial using plant-based therapies for rheumatoid arthritis. She always credited your work with giving her an extra decade of mobility." Howard studied the yellowed newspaper photo showing a much younger version of himself in a university laboratory. "I remember the trial," he said softly. "Your grandmother had a remarkable response to the protocol. She never forgot your kindness," Sophia continued. "When I saw the announcement about this garden, I requested the assignment specifically." She gestured around them. "I came expecting to write about plants, but there's a much bigger story here, isn't there? About revival, not just of a garden, but of people who've been discarded." Howard considered her words. "We prefer the term overlooked to discarded," he said with a hint of his dry humor. "And yes, there is a larger narrative at work here. Would you be willing to share it?" Sophia asked, producing a recorder. The full story: how a renowned botanist ended up in a nursing home, and how a therapy dog sparked a revolution in elder care. Duke, hearing something in her voice, moved closer to Sophia, gently pressing against her leg in a gesture of approval. "Well," Howard said, watching the interaction with interest, "it appears my associate has vetted you and found you acceptable. Where would you like to begin?" As Howard shared his journey, from accomplished academic to forgotten elder to unexpected revolutionary, a summer storm gathered in the distant mountains. By the time he finished, thunder rumbled ominously on the horizon. "We should move indoors," Amara suggested, approaching with concern. The Weather Service issued a warning. Residents and visitors began packing up displays and securing equipment as the wind strengthened. Howard directed operations from his wheelchair, ensuring the newly planted specimens were protected. "The raised beds need covering," he called to a group of volunteers. "There are tarps in the storage shed." As rain began to fall, Duke suddenly barked sharply and raced toward the facility's main building. Moments later, he returned, tugging at Howard's sleeve with gentle insistence. "He wants us to follow him," Howard said, recognizing the behavior pattern. Inside, Duke led them to a storage room off the main corridor, a space Howard had never entered. The dog pawed at the door until Amara used her key card to open it. The room contained miscellaneous maintenance supplies, holiday decorations, and several filing cabinets. Duke moved directly to a cabinet in the corner, whining softly. "What is it, boy?" Howard asked, wheeling closer. Amara opened the drawer, finding it filled with financial records. "These are the original garden maintenance files," she said, scanning the documents. "And requisition forms for equipment that was never purchased. Evidence of misappropriation," Howard observed. But how did Duke know? Sophia, who had followed them inside, stared at the German shepherd with amazement. "That's not normal behavior for a therapy dog. Duke has consistently defied expectations," Howard replied, watching as the dog sat calmly beside the evidence. "Perhaps we should stop being surprised by his insights." Through the windows, they could see the storm intensifying, rain lashing against the glass. But inside, surrounded by proof of their suspicions and the unexpected ally who had revealed it, Howard felt a profound sense of vindication. Later that evening, after the storm had passed and the excitement had subsided, Howard sat with Duke in his room, the day's events replaying in his mind. "You've changed everything," he told the dog quietly, stroking his ears. "Not just for me, but for everyone here." Duke rested his head on Howard's knee. eyes fixed on the old man's face with unmistakable intelligence. "I wonder," Howard murmured, "what else you understand that we haven't yet grasped." Outside, the garden glistened in the aftermath of rain, plants bending and recovering with the resilience that had fascinated Howard throughout his career. Like those plants, he too was finding his way back toward the light, growing stronger with each passing day. The ringing of his room phone interrupted his thoughts. It was Amara, her voice breathless with excitement. "Dr. Wright just called an emergency board meeting," she reported. "Mercer has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, and they're asking if you would be willing to serve as a consultant for the future development of the therapeutic programs." Howard's gaze moved to the framed botanical print on his wall, a gift from Melissa to replace the dusty credentials that had hung there for years. It showed a mature oak tree, its extensive root system revealed beneath the soil. "Tell them," he said, finding himself smiling, "that I would be honored to plant new seeds." Howard stared at the email on the tablet Amara had helped him purchase, reading its contents for the third time to ensure he wasn't misinterpreting the message. "Eastern State University is pleased to invite you to lead a guest lecture on integrative therapeutic horticulture for our graduate program in gerontological healthcare." The invitation had come from Dr. Laurel Chun, chair of integrative medicine, a former student of his who had evidently followed his recent media coverage with interest. 2 months had passed since the summer festival and the subsequent upheaval at Pinecrest. The investigation into Director Mercer's financial mismanagement had expanded beyond the garden program, revealing years of diverted funds and neglected resources. He had resigned rather than face termination, and the board had appointed an interim director while conducting a national search for a permanent replacement. The garden had not only survived the transition, but thrived. Howard's role as therapeutic program consultant had grown to include advising on nutrition, physical activity protocols, and environmental design throughout the facility. Residents who had been written off as declining showed remarkable improvements when given purpose and autonomy. "Good news?" asked Eliza Washington, pausing beside Howard's table in the common room, her walker adorned with a small basket of freshly harvested lavender. "An unexpected opportunity," Howard replied, showing her the email. "They're asking me to speak at the university." Eliza smiled, the deep lines around her eyes crinkling with genuine pleasure. About time those academics remembered who wrote half their textbooks. "When do you go?" "I haven't decided if I should accept," Howard admitted. The logistics seemed daunting. "Nonsense," Eliza declared with the authoritative tone of her teaching days. "Amara can drive you. That girl would move mountains if you asked her to." Before Howard could respond, commotion near the entrance caught their attention. Duke bounded into the common room, followed by Melissa and a distinguished woman in her 60s with a visitor's badge. "Dr. Thornton," Melissa called, her expression a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "There's someone here to see you." The woman stepped forward, her posture rigid, her resemblance to Howard unmistakable despite her darker coloring. "Hello, Dad," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Howard felt the air leave his lungs. Catherine, his daughter, whom he hadn't seen in nearly 3 years, stood before him, clutching her purse with white-knuckled hands. "I saw the article," she said, "in Medical Horizons magazine, about the garden and the therapy program." Duke moved between them, his body language neither welcoming nor hostile, simply watchful. "Perhaps we should speak privately," Howard suggested, aware of the interested gazes of residents and staff. He nodded toward Eliza, who squeezed his shoulder in silent support before discreetly withdrawing. In his room, no longer sterile and impersonal but filled with books, plant specimens, and framed photographs of the garden's progress, Howard gestured for Catherine to take the visitor's chair while he positioned his wheelchair facing her. Duke settled on the floor between them, alert and attentive. "You're looking well," Catherine began awkwardly. Better than when you left me here," Howard finished, his tone factual rather than accusatory. Catherine flinched. "I didn't have much choice, Dad. After your stroke, the doctors said you needed round-the-clock care. My job, the kids, Mark's transfer to Seattle." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "But that's not an excuse for not visiting, for not calling. I should have been here." Howard studied his daughter's face, so like her mother's in moments of distress. "Why are you here now, Catherine?" The article said you've revolutionized elder care approaches, that you're consulting for other facilities, developing new therapeutic protocols. She hesitated. That you're yourself again, the professor, the researcher I grew up admiring. I realized I'd given up on you prematurely. Duke made a soft sound, not quite a growl, but a clear indication of disapproval. Howard placed a calming hand on the dog's head. You read about my professional resurgence and decided I was worth reconnecting with? Howard asked, his academic precision cutting through emotional ambiguity. That's not fair, Catherine protested. I made mistakes, terrible ones. I abandoned you when you needed family most. But seeing your work in that magazine, her composure cracked. It reminded me that you're still my father. Still the man who taught me to identify every wildflower in the mountains, who quizzed me on Latin botanical names, who believed women belonged in science labs when my high school counselor suggested secretarial school. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm here to ask if there's any possibility of forgiveness, of starting again. Howard felt his own emotions threatening to overwhelm his carefully constructed composure. Before he could respond, Duke rose and moved to Catherine's side, gently resting his head on her knee, the same gesture of connection he had first offered to Howard months ago. Well, Howard said softly, watching the interaction. It appears my colleague has rendered his opinion. Catherine looked down at the German shepherd in confusion. Duke has exceptional judgment regarding human character, Howard explained. He sees something in you worth his trust. He's beautiful, Catherine said, tentatively stroking Duke's fur. The article mentioned a therapy dog, but I didn't realize how important he is to the program. To the residents. To me, Howard acknowledged. He changed everything. Over the next hour, father and daughter began the delicate process of reconnection. Catherine shared updates on Howard's grandchildren, now teenagers with their own academic interests. Howard described the garden's evolution and the ongoing transformation of Pinecrest's approach to elder care. There's a research study underway, he explained, professional enthusiasm temporarily eclipsing personal tension. Duke appears to have the ability to detect subtle changes in residents' health conditions before clinical symptoms appear. The university's veterinary medicine department is collaborating with us to document his interventions. That's extraordinary, Catherine said. Like those dogs who can detect cancer? Similar principle, broader application, Howard nodded. He's identified early signs of infection, medication reactions, even minor strokes, all through changes in scent profiles imperceptible to humans. As their conversation continued, Amara appeared at the door for Howard's scheduled medication review. Her expression registered surprise at Catherine's presence. You must be Dr. Thornton's daughter, she said, extending her hand professionally. I'm Amara Wilson, his primary nurse and research collaborator. Research collaborator, Catherine repeated, glancing at her father. Dad's always chosen his associates carefully. I've learned from the best, Amara replied with a warm smile at Howard. Your father has transformed our entire approach to elder care. We're implementing his protocols throughout the regional network. After Amara completed her clinical tasks and departed, Catherine turned to Howard with newfound respect in her eyes. You've built something remarkable here. We have, Howard corrected, including Duke in his gesture. It's been a collaborative effort. Catherine hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been on her mind throughout their conversation. Would you consider coming to Seattle? We have excellent medical facilities, and with your improved condition. Howard shook his head. My work is here, Catherine. My purpose has taken root in this place. But we could find you a position at a university or research facility there, she persisted. You could live with us, see the grandkids regularly. Duke stood, moving back to Howard's side with deliberate steps. I appreciate the offer, Howard said gently. But transplanting a mature specimen rarely ends well. I've established a symbiotic relationship here, one that benefits not just me, but an entire community. Catherine's disappointment was evident, but she nodded in understanding. You always did prefer being needed to being comfortable. Perhaps that's my greatest flaw, or my saving grace, Howard acknowledged with a small smile. But I would welcome regular visits, when your schedule permits. The grandchildren might find the garden educational. As Catherine prepared to leave, promising to return soon with her family, Howard felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for lost years, cautious hope for reconciliation, and profound gratitude for the path that had led him to this moment. Later that evening, as sunset painted the mountains in shades of amber and gold, Howard sat with Duke in the garden's contemplation area. Amara joined them, bringing tea in ceramic mugs created by one of the residents in the newly established pottery program. "Your daughter seems sincere," she observed, settling on a bench nearby. "She is," Howard replied. "Catherine has always been genuine, even in her mistakes." "Will you accept the university lecture invitation?" Amara asked, changing the subject. Howard nodded. "I believe I will. The opportunity to influence a new generation of healthcare providers is too valuable to decline." "You're starting a movement," Amara said, pride evident in her voice. "Word is spreading. 3 other facilities in the region have requested consultations." Duke, lying at Howard's feet, suddenly raised his head, ears alert. A moment later, one of the resident volunteers appeared on the path, waving excitedly. "Dr. Thornton, the university research team is here early. They've brought equipment to monitor Duke's interactions with the study participants." Howard exchanged glances with Amara, both recognizing the accelerating momentum of their work. What had begun as one man's resurrection through an unlikely canine connection was expanding into something neither had anticipated: a fundamental reconsideration of how society values its elders and their accumulated wisdom. "Well, Duke," Howard said, scratching behind the German shepherd's ears, "it seems your unconventional methods are about to face scientific scrutiny. Are you prepared to reveal your secrets?" Duke's tail thumped against the garden path, his amber eyes reflecting the last golden rays of sunlight as they prepared to meet the researchers who would help translate his instinctive understanding into protocols that might transform elder care far beyond the boundaries of Pinecrest. "Remarkable response times," Dr. Vanessa Liu murmured, reviewing the data on her laptop. "Duke's alerting behaviors precede measurable clinical symptoms by an average of 17 hours. That's a potentially life-saving window for intervention." Howard nodded, examining the charts displayed on the screen. For 6 weeks, the university research team had been documenting Duke's interactions with 30 volunteer residents, using wearable sensors to track vital signs and biochemical markers that might correlate with the dog's behavior. "His accuracy rate exceeds 92%, Howard noted, "and the false positives have generally indicated some form of distress, even if not the specific condition we were monitoring." They sat in what had once been a storage closet but was now designated as the research hub, a small but functional space equipped with monitoring equipment, filing cabinets, and a wall of charts tracking various aspects of the study. Duke lay nearby, seemingly indifferent to the fact that he was the center of this scientific inquiry. "The physiological mechanisms remain unclear," Dr. Liu continued. "We know he's detecting scent markers, but the specific compounds—" She shook her head in professional frustration. "We need more sophisticated equipment." "Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle," Howard suggested. "Instead of trying to identify what Duke perceives, we could focus on establishing reliable correlations between his alerts and subsequent conditions. A predictive model based on observed patterns." Dr. Liu's eyes lit up. Like early weather forecasting, before meteorologists fully understood atmospheric physics, they recognized pattern associations that proved reliable indicators. "Precisely," Howard confirmed. "Duke has already demonstrated consistent behavioral markers for different conditions. The head tilt for potential neurological events, the right paw nudge for respiratory concerns, the distinctive whine for pain management issues." Their discussion was interrupted by a knock at the door. Melissa entered, accompanied by a distinguished man in his 60s wearing a tailored suit and an expression of barely contained excitement. "Dr. Thornton, I hope we're not interrupting," Melissa began. "This is Dr. James Harrison, the new director of Pinecrest. The board approved his appointment this morning." Howard extended his hand, assessing the newcomer with the careful observation that had served him well throughout his career. "Welcome to our modest research endeavor, Director Harrison." "Modest," Harrison replied with genuine enthusiasm. "Dr. Thornton, what you've pioneered here is revolutionary. Your integration of traditional botanical knowledge with modern therapeutic approaches, combined with this groundbreaking animal-assisted diagnostic work, it's precisely why I accepted this position." Howard raised an eyebrow, unaccustomed to such immediate administrative support. "You're familiar with our programs?" I've read every paper and article, Harrison confirmed. I spent 20 years as a geriatric physician before moving into healthcare administration. When the board described your work here, I knew this was where the future of elder care was being written. Dr. Liu looked up from her laptop. Director Harrison was one of the first advocates for integrative medicine at Eastern State University Medical Center. His protocols for incorporating traditional healing practices into contemporary geriatric care are standard curriculum now. You're Dr. Liu? Harrison recognized her with evident respect. Your research on biometric monitoring in assisted living environments is exceptional. I had no idea you were involved in this study. As the professional introductions continued, Howard observed Duke's reaction to the new director. The German Shepherd had risen and approached Harrison, conducting his customary assessment with focused attention. After a moment, Duke sat directly in front of the director and offered his paw. Well, I appear to have passed the most important evaluation. Harrison laughed, shaking the offered paw with appropriate seriousness. Indeed, Howard agreed. Duke's judgment has proven remarkably sound. Harrison turned back to Howard, his expression becoming more businesslike. I'd like to discuss expanding your programs throughout the facility, Dr. Thornton. The board has approved a significant budget increase based on the preliminary results of your work. They're particularly interested in establishing Pinecrest as a center of excellence for innovative elder care. Howard felt a complex surge of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a weary recognition of how institutional priorities shifted with demonstrated success rather than human need. I assume this newfound enthusiasm correlates with the positive media coverage and research attention, he observed dryly. Harrison didn't flinch from the implied criticism. Of course it does. But motivations matter less than outcomes, wouldn't you agree? If corporate recognition of positive publicity leads to better care for residents, isn't that still a win? Howard studied the new director thoughtfully. You're refreshingly honest, Dr. Harrison. I've found transparency saves considerable time, Harrison replied. Now, I understand you're scheduled to lecture at Eastern State next week. The board would like to coordinate your presentation with an announcement about Pinecrest's new Center for Integrative Elder Care, with you as its founding director, if you're amenable. The offer hung in the air, unexpected and momentous. Howard glanced at Duke, who had returned to his side, then at Dr. Liu, whose expression reflected professional appreciation of the opportunity. I would need complete academic freedom, Howard stipulated, and final approval over therapeutic protocols. Naturally, Harrison agreed without hesitation. We're investing in your expertise, not attempting to constrain it. After Harrison departed, promising formal paperwork by the end of the week, Howard sat in contemplative silence. Dr. Liu closed her laptop and regarded him with a knowing smile. Not quite how you expected your retirement to unfold, is it? Howard chuckled softly. Not remotely. A year ago, I was effectively waiting to die. Now I'm being offered the chance to reshape an entire field of care. All because a very special dog decided you weren't finished yet, she observed, nodding toward Duke, who had dozed off after the excitement of the meeting. Life's most profound changes often arrive on 4 legs rather than 2, Howard agreed. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity. Howard's lecture preparation merged with planning sessions for the new center, consultation requests from other facilities, and continued research with Duke. The quiet isolation that had defined his early years at Pinecrest felt like a distant memory. On the morning of his university lecture, Howard found himself facing an unexpected challenge: what to wear. His wardrobe, long limited to facility-provided clothing and a few casual items, seemed inadequate for his return to academic presentation. A knock at his door revealed Amara, holding a garment bag. Special delivery, she announced. A collaborative gift from the garden volunteers and research team. Inside the bag, Howard found a tailored jacket of deep forest green, a crisp white shirt, and charcoal trousers. A small botanical pin, a precise rendering of American ginseng, adorned the jacket lapel. This is, Howard began, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. Appropriate for a distinguished professor returning to the podium, Amara finished for him. We took measurements while you were distracted with the research data. The lecture hall at Eastern State University was filled beyond capacity. Students sat in the aisles, faculty members stood along the walls, and a live stream had been arranged for overflow rooms. Howard, wheeled to the podium by Amara with Duke walking solemnly beside them, surveyed the crowd with professional composure that masked his inner trepidation. Dr. Laurel Chun provided a glowing introduction, detailing Howard's academic achievements and recent innovations at Pinecrest. As applause filled the hall, Howard took a deep breath and began his presentation, reconsidering healing, integrative approaches to elder care. For 90 minutes, he held the audience spellbound, weaving together botanical science, traditional knowledge, modern research methodologies, and personal experience into a compelling case for transforming how society views and treats its aging members. The fundamental error in contemporary elder care, he concluded, is treating age as a pathology rather than a phase of continued growth and contribution. When we recognize the accumulated wisdom and potential ongoing contributions of our elders, we transform care facilities from waiting rooms for death into incubators of purpose and meaning. The standing ovation that followed was overwhelming. As Howard fielded questions from eager students and skeptical faculty alike, he felt fully alive in his element once more. The teacher, the researcher, the advocate he had always been. Afterward, at a small reception hosted by the Integrative Medicine Department, Howard found himself approached by university administrators, healthcare executives, and government officials, all expressing interest in implementing his methodologies. "You've started something significant," Dr. Chen told him, clinking her sparkling water against his in a quiet toast. "And to think, a year ago you were considered just another resident in long-term care." "I was," Howard acknowledged. "The system hadn't failed me so much as forgotten why it existed in the first place." Duke, who had remained impeccably behaved throughout the events, suddenly perked up, his attention drawn to the entrance of the reception room. Howard followed the dog's gaze to see Catherine arriving with two teenagers, a boy and girl who bore the unmistakable Thornton features. "We made it," Catherine called, approaching with evident pride. "They've been talking about nothing else since I told them their grandfather was revolutionizing elder care." The teenagers, Howard's grandchildren, whom he hadn't seen since they were small, approached with a mixture of shyness and curiosity. "This is Michael, who's 17 now, and Emma, 15, Catherine introduced them. "Kids, this is your grandfather, Dr. Howard Thornton. And this," Howard added, gesturing to the German shepherd at his side, "is my colleague, Duke." As the family reconnection unfolded, Howard observed Duke's gentle interaction with his grandchildren, especially Emma, who knelt to greet the dog properly. Something in her methodical approach reminded Howard of himself at a similar age. "Mom says you work with medicinal plants," Emma said, looking up from petting Duke. "I'm doing my science project on ethnobotany this year." Howard felt an unexpected surge of emotion. "Perhaps you'd like to visit the garden at Pinecrest," he offered. "We're propagating several native species with significant historical applications." Emma's eyes lit up. "Could I? That would be amazing." As the evening progressed, Howard found himself at the center of a convergence he could never have anticipated. Family, profession, purpose, and an extraordinary canine companion who had somehow orchestrated it all. Later, as Amara drove them back to Pinecrest with Duke dozing in the back seat beside research equipment, Howard watched the familiar mountains emerging from darkness as they approached the facility. "A successful day, I'd say," Amara remarked. "Indeed," Howard agreed quietly, "though I find myself wondering what Duke would consider success in all this." Amara glanced at the sleeping dog in the rearview mirror. "I suspect his metrics are simpler than ours. You're engaged with life again. You have purpose, connection, respect. From his perspective, mission accomplished." Howard nodded thoughtfully. The wisdom of simplicity. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson he's offered. As they pulled into Pinecrest's driveway, the facility's lights shone welcomingly against the night sky. What had once seemed a terminal destination now felt like a beginning. A laboratory for ideas that might transform countless lives beyond its walls. Duke stirred as the car stopped, lifting his head to meet Howard's gaze with what could only be described as satisfaction. "Yes, old friend," Howard said softly. "We've come quite a distance, haven't we? And it seems the journey is just beginning." The autumn equinox arrived with a spectacular display of color transforming the mountains surrounding Pinecrest. The facility's grounds, once neglected, now mirrored the seasonal splendor with carefully tended gardens transitioning to fall hues. Bright orange marigolds and deep purple asters bordered pathways where residents walked with newfound purpose and vigor. The Healing Horizons Symposium expects over 300 attendees, Amara reported, reviewing the registration data on her tablet. Healthcare administrators from 27 states, representatives from 4 federal agencies, and international observers from Canada, Japan, and Sweden. Howard nodded, adjusting the placement of educational materials in what had become Pinecrest's demonstration garden. And how many of our residents are participating as presenters? 17. Amara confirmed with evident pride, each leading sessions on different aspects of the integrated care model. In the 3 months since Howard's university lecture, Pinecrest had undergone a remarkable transformation. Director Harrison had fulfilled his promises, securing funding for expanded therapeutic programs and renovating and used spaces into research and educational facilities. The newly established Center for Integrative Elder Care occupied the facility's East Wing, where clinical studies documented the outcomes of Howard's methodologies. Most significantly, residents had been repositioned from passive recipients of care to active contributors, teaching, researching, mentoring, and governing through a newly established resident council with actual decision-making authority. Mr. Miller's session on adaptive gardening techniques for limited mobility is already oversubscribed, Amara continued. And Mrs. Washington's workshop on traditional Appalachian herbal preparations has a waiting list. Excellent, Howard replied. And the Duke's study presentation? Prime slot on the second day, Amara said. Dr. Liu has prepared a compelling visualization of the data. The National Institutes of Health representatives specifically requested front-row seats. Duke, who had been inspecting a newly planted section of autumn-blooming herbs, returned to Howard's side at the mention of his name. The German Shepherd had become something of a celebrity in healthcare circles, with researchers still struggling to fully explain his diagnostic abilities. There he is, called an enthusiastic voice from the garden entrance. Emma, Howard's granddaughter, hurried down the path with a notebook clutched to her chest. Catherine followed at a more measured pace, carrying what appeared to be a large portfolio case. In the months since reconnecting, Catherine had made good on her promise of regular visits. Emma, in particular, had formed a special bond with her grandfather, displaying a natural affinity for botanical science that echoed Howard's own youthful passion. We brought the project boards, Emma announced, reaching down to greet Duke before hugging her grandfather. The science fair is next week, but I wanted you to see the final presentation first. I'm honored, Howard replied, genuinely moved by her desire for his approval. Shall we review it in the research room? As they made their way toward the facility, Howard noted the easy familiarity with which Emma navigated Pinecrest's grounds. What had once been an institutional setting avoided by visitors had become a welcoming community hub where family connections flourished. In the research room, Emma carefully set up 3 professional quality display boards detailing her science project, Ethnobotanical Wisdom, validating traditional plant knowledge through modern research methods. Her investigation had compared documented folk remedies from Appalachian communities with contemporary pharmacological studies of the same plant compounds. I used your original field notes as primary sources, Emma explained, pointing to carefully formatted citations. And then I tracked down recent peer-reviewed studies on the same botanical specimens. Howard examined her methodology section with growing admiration. At 15, Emma displayed a scientific rigor that many university students lacked. The correlation between traditional applications and confirmed bioactive properties is statistically significant, she continued, flipping to her results section. 83% of folk remedies demonstrated scientifically verified therapeutic effects aligned with their historical usage. Impressive work, Howard acknowledged, pride evident in his voice. Your analytical approach is exceptionally sound. Emma beamed at the praise. I've been accepted into the Young Scientists Summer Program at Eastern State for next year, she announced. They specifically mentioned my work with medicinal plants as aligning with their research priorities. Catherine watched the interaction with a mixture of joy and regret. She has your mind, she said quietly to Howard. All those years we lost. We're making up for them now, Howard replied, equally softly. The future matters more than the past. Their conversation was interrupted by Melissa's arrival with Duke's regular handler schedule. The therapy dog program had expanded significantly, now including 6 certified animals working with specific resident groups based on therapeutic needs. Duke, however, maintained his special status, dividing his time between research activities and his original bond with Howard. "I almost forgot," Catherine said, opening the portfolio case she'd carried in. "We brought something else we thought you might appreciate." She withdrew a framed document, Howard's original design sketches for the medicinal garden, created more than 20 years earlier. The yellowed paper showed detailed planting plans, with handwritten notes on therapeutic applications and optimal growing conditions. "Where did you find this?" Howard asked, stunned to see his own handwriting from decades past. "In Mom's papers," Catherine explained, her voice softening. "She kept everything, Dad. All your research, your publications, newspaper clippings about your work. After she got sick, she organized it all in labeled folders, even when she couldn't remember other things." Howard gently touched the glass covering his old designs. "Caroline always believed this work mattered, even when funding agencies disagreed." "She was right," Catherine said simply. "Just took the world a while to catch up." The approaching symposium transformed Pinecrest into a hive of activity. Residents who had once spent their days in isolated routines now led preparation committees, developed presentation materials, and rehearsed their speaking roles with newfound confidence. "Remember when we couldn't get Mr. Abernathy to leave his room?" Amara remarked to Howard as they observed the former accountant directing the setup of the registration area with meticulous attention to detail. "Now we can't get him to stop organizing things." "Purpose is a powerful motivator," Howard replied, "particularly when accompanied by respect." The night before the symposium's opening, Howard found himself unable to sleep. He wheeled himself to the garden, now illuminated by subtle landscape lighting that enhanced its healing atmosphere even after sunset. Duke, sensing his midnight excursion, padded silently alongside. "Nervous, Dr. Thornton?" came Director Harrison's voice from a bench near the pergola. "Contemplative," Howard corrected, guiding his wheelchair to join the director. "A year ago, I was effectively waiting to die in room 217. Now we're about to host healthcare leaders from around the world." Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "I reviewed your admission records. The attending physician had documented failure to thrive and predicted less than 18 months life expectancy. A reasonable clinical assessment at the time," Howard acknowledged without bitterness. "I had surrendered to institutional existence. And now?" Harrison prompted. Howard gestured toward the garden, the renovated facility beyond, and finally to Duke sitting attentively beside his wheelchair. "Now I understand that my most significant work may have been waiting for the right catalyst." "Speaking of catalysts," Harrison said, his tone shifting to something more cautious, "there's something you should know before tomorrow's events begin. The symposium has attracted some unexpected attention." Howard raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Representatives from Westridge Healthcare Corporation will be attending," Harrison explained. "They've expressed interest in acquiring our methodologies for implementation throughout their national network of facilities." Howard's expression hardened. Westridge was notorious for prioritizing profit margins over resident care, operating facilities that technically met regulatory requirements while failing to provide meaningful quality of life. They're looking to incorporate superficial elements of our approach to improve their marketing materials, Howard surmised, without embracing the fundamental philosophy that residents are contributors rather than commodities. "Most likely," Harrison agreed, "but their presence offers both challenge and opportunity. If we can convince them of the cost-effectiveness of true integrative care, reduced medication dependence, decreased hospitalizations, improved staff retention, we might influence practices affecting thousands of elders nationwide." Howard considered this perspective a compelling point, though I suspect Duke would have strong opinions about their corporate culture. As if understanding the reference, Duke made a soft huffing sound that both men interpreted as skepticism. "I've asked Amara to keep him close during their tour," Harrison admitted with a smile. "His judgments tend to be rather undiplomatic." The symposium opened the following morning under clear autumn skies. The facility's main entrance featured a banner proclaiming "Healing Horizons, redefining elder care through integrative approaches." Residents in custom-made vests served as guides, directing visitors to registration tables, presentation venues, and demonstration areas. Howard, positioned near the welcome podium, observed the arriving attendees with professional interest. Most displayed genuine curiosity, while some exhibited the skepticism typical of traditional healthcare administrators. A small group of men and women in nearly identical dark suits, clearly the Westridge representatives, moved through the crowd with calculating efficiency, documenting everything with tablets and discrete photographs. Director Harrison delivered opening remarks that skillfully balanced academic rigor with accessible concepts, emphasizing the evidence-based outcomes of Pinecrest's transformed approach. Howard followed with a keynote address tracking the evolution of the integrative care model from theoretical concept to practical implementation. The most revolutionary aspect of our work is also the simplest, he concluded. We stopped seeing age as a disease to be managed and started recognizing it as a phase of life with its own unique contributions. Our residents aren't problems to be solved, they're resources to be engaged. The day proceeded with breakout sessions, practical demonstrations, and guided tours of Pinecrest's specialized areas. Visitors observed therapy sessions, participated in the garden's sensory exploration stations, and engaged with resident experts in various healing modalities. By mid-afternoon, Howard noticed the Westridge representatives congregating near the research hub, reviewing the data displays with evident interest. He wheeled himself toward them, Duke walking beside him with uncharacteristic stiffness in his posture. "I see you're examining our outcomes data," Howard observed, introducing himself to the corporate team. The reduction in psychotropic medication usage is particularly significant, 62% decrease, while simultaneously improving quality of life metrics. "Impressive results," acknowledged the lead representative, a woman whose name badge identified her as Victoria Chambers, Executive Vice President. "Though we question the scalability of such personalized approaches in larger networks. Personalization is precisely what makes it scalable," Howard countered. "Standard protocols treat symptoms rather than individuals, requiring ever-increasing interventions as initial approaches fail. Our model adapts to each resident's capabilities and interests, creating self-sustaining therapeutic communities rather than dependent patient populations." Chambers smiled thinly. "A compelling philosophy, Dr. Thornton. Though implementation costs are offset by reduced pharmaceutical expenses, decreased staff turnover, and lower hospitalization rates," Howard finished. "The financial data is included in your symposium materials. Page 17 details the cost-benefit analysis across our 3-year projection." As the conversation continued, Howard noted Duke's attentive focus on one of the junior Westridge representatives, a younger man who had separated slightly from the group and was examining the research posters with what appeared to be genuine interest rather than corporate assessment. Later, as the first day's formal activities concluded and attendees dispersed to their hotels, Howard found himself approached by this same young man in a quiet moment near the garden entrance. "Dr. Thornton," he began hesitantly. "I'm Alex Rivera, Director of Program Development at Westridge. I wonder if I might speak with you privately?" Howard studied the young man's earnest expression. "Of course. Though I should warn you that private conversations in my case typically include a 4-legged associate." He nodded toward Duke, who had positioned himself beside Howard's wheelchair. Rivera smiled, the first genuine expression Howard had seen from any of the Westridge team. "I'd expect nothing less. Your canine colleague seems to be an essential part of the operation here." They found a quiet spot in the garden's contemplation area, where the evening light filtered through autumn foliage to create a peaceful atmosphere conducive to honest conversation. "I'm not here in an official capacity," Rivera began, loosening his corporate tie. "At least, not entirely. My grandmother is in a Westridge facility in Arizona. The care is technically adequate, but she's fading away. Not physically, but her spirit, her sense of self." He looked directly at Howard. "What you've created here, this is what elder care should be." Howard nodded, recognizing the familiar pain of watching a loved one diminish within institutional walls. "Your colleagues seem less convinced. They're focused on quarterly metrics," Rivera acknowledged. "But some of us are trying to shift the corporate perspective. That's why I pushed for our attendance here. I needed decision-makers to see alternatives with their own eyes." Duke, who had been listening attentively, moved closer to Rivera, resting his head briefly on the young man's knee, a gesture of approval that Howard had come to trust implicitly. "It seems you have an ally in your efforts," Howard observed, nodding toward Duke. Rivera smiled again, gently stroking the dog's head. I'll take all the support I can get. The culture at Westridge won't change overnight, but if we can implement even portions of your model. Start with autonomy, Howard advised. The simple recognition that residents are still the authors of their own lives, regardless of physical limitations. Everything else flows from that fundamental respect. As twilight deepened around them, Howard found himself sharing insights with this unexpected corporate ally, seeds of change that might eventually transform even the most profit-driven healthcare systems. Small beginnings often yield the most significant transformations, Howard told Rivera as they concluded their conversation. A single interaction with an extraordinary dog changed everything for me. Perhaps your grandmother's situation will become the catalyst for broader change at Westridge. That night, as Howard prepared for the symposium's second day, featuring the Duke study presentation and resident-led workshops, he felt a profound sense of completion emerging from what had once been his deepest despair. The journey from abandoned elder to revolutionary healthcare pioneer had been as improbable as it was profound. In his dreams, he walked through mountain forests with Caroline beside him, collecting the healing plants that had defined his professional life. You found your way back, she told him with the smile he remembered so clearly. Though you took a rather unconventional path. The best discoveries often happen when one strays from established routes, he replied in the logic of dreams. You taught me that. He awoke before dawn with tears on his cheeks and Duke's warm presence beside his bed, the faithful companion somehow sensing his emotional journey through the night. One more day of changing minds, old friend, Howard murmured, reaching down to stroke the dog's ears. Then perhaps we can focus on simply living well while the seeds we've planted continue to grow. Duke's tail thumped against the floor in what Howard had come to recognize as wholehearted agreement. 1 year later, Howard sat beneath the pergola in what had become known as the Thornton Therapeutic Garden, observing the balanced ecosystem that had flourished under careful tending. Spring had arrived early, painting the landscape with vibrant life that mirrored the transformation within Pinecrest's walls. Duke rested beside Howard's wheelchair, his once jet-black muzzle now frosted with distinguished gray. The German Shepherd had gradually transitioned from active therapy work to what Melissa jokingly called executive consultation, maintaining his special bond with Howard while mentoring younger dogs in the expanded therapy program. The board approved the satellite implementation, announced Director Harrison, approaching with a tablet displaying architectural renderings. Breaking ground on the first 3 regional centers next month. Howard nodded with satisfaction. The Pinecrest model had proven so successful that a statewide initiative now sought to establish similar integrated care centers throughout Appalachia, bringing dignity-centered approaches to rural communities long underserved by modern healthcare. And the training programs? Howard inquired, scrolling through the project documentation. Fully subscribed, Harrison confirmed. 200 healthcare professionals for the initial certification cohort. The university partnership is expanding to include nursing, social work, and medical school rotations. What had begun as one elderly botanist's unexpected revival had blossomed into a movement that was systematically reimagining elder care. The Healing Horizons approach, as it had come to be known, had spread far beyond Pinecrest's boundaries, influencing policy discussions at state and federal levels. Dr. Thornton called a hesitant voice from the garden path. I hope I'm not interrupting. Howard turned to see Alex Rivera approaching, dressed in casual clothes rather than his former corporate attire. Duke immediately rose, tail wagging in greeting. Mr. Rivera, Howard welcomed him. A pleasant surprise. Director Harrison, you remember Alex from Westridge Healthcare? Former Westridge, Rivera corrected with a smile. I've accepted a position with the National Elder Dignity Initiative. We're developing standards for person-centered care based largely on the Pinecrest model. Harrison extended his hand. Congratulations. A significant career shift. Necessary one, Rivera replied. After last year's symposium, I spent months trying to implement changes at Westridge facilities. The corporate structure was resistant. When the initiative offered an opportunity to effect change at a policy level, it felt like the right path forward. As Harrison excused himself to attend a meeting, Rivera sat on a bench near Howard's wheelchair. I brought my grandmother to the new integrated center in Charleston, he shared. 2 months in, She's gardening again, teaching Spanish classes to staff members, and serving on the resident council. The transformation has been remarkable. The human spirit responds to purpose and respect, Howard observed. Age doesn't diminish that fundamental need. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma, now 16, carrying soil samples and collection equipment for her ongoing research project. The Young Scientists program had expanded her initial ethnobotanical investigation into a comprehensive study of soil microbiome interactions with medicinal plant compounds. "Grandpa, you won't believe what we found in the chromatography results," she began excitedly, then paused upon noticing Rivera. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were in a meeting." "Not at all," Howard assured her. "Emma, this is Alex Rivera with the National Elder Dignity Initiative. Alex, my granddaughter and research associate, Emma Thornton." Rivera smiled at the easy way Howard incorporated his granddaughter into his professional identity. "Research associate at 16, impressive. Grandpa doesn't believe in age restrictions for meaningful work," Emma replied with the confidence of someone who had never been doubted. "Our paper on endophytic fungi and echinacea root systems was accepted for the Botanical Medicine Conference next month. We're presenting together." Howard felt a familiar surge of pride watching Emma organize her materials with practiced efficiency. Their relationship had deepened into a true mentorship, bridging the years of separation with shared intellectual passion. "I should get these samples to the lab," Emma said after briefly explaining her findings. "Mom's picking me up at 4 for dinner," she said to remind you. "The family dinner," Howard remembered. "Catherine would be justifiably irritated if I forgot again." After Emma departed, Rivera watched Howard with thoughtful consideration. "You've created something extraordinary here, Dr. Thornton. Not just the care model, but this intergenerational connection. Most people see nursing homes as places where elders are separated from family life. That perception is precisely what we're changing," Howard replied. "Pinecrest isn't where I live apart from society. It's where society comes to engage with the knowledge and experience concentrated here." As if to illustrate his point, a group of elementary school children appeared on the main garden path, led by Eliza Washington. The former schoolteacher had established a popular program teaching young students about plant life cycles and traditional uses of native species. "The children come twice weekly now," Howard explained. "They're growing their own garden plot with supervision from our resident experts. The school reports improved science scores and, more importantly, changed attitudes toward aging. These children don't fear growing old. They see it as a time of valuable contribution." The sound of Duke's alert bark drew their attention. The German shepherd had risen, ears forward, focused on a maintenance worker who had paused while crossing the grounds, leaning heavily against a utility cart. "Excuse me," Howard said to Rivera, immediately recognizing Duke's specific warning pattern. "Medical response needed." He called to a nearby staff member, pointing toward the worker. "Duke has indicated respiratory distress." The well-rehearsed response system activated immediately. Within moments, medical personnel were assisting the worker, who was indeed experiencing breathing difficulty but hadn't yet recognized the severity of his symptoms. "Still saving lives," Rivera remarked when Howard returned. "Does Duke's accuracy rate remain as high?" 97% with known conditions, Howard confirmed. "Though we've observed some changes in his alerting behaviors as he's aged. More subtle indicators, requiring closer observation." Rivera hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly prompted his visit. "Have you documented his training methods?" The potential applications for early intervention programs are enormous. Howard shook his head slowly, absently stroking Duke's fur as the dog returned to his side. "That's the most fascinating aspect, and the most challenging for traditional research paradigms. We didn't train Duke. His abilities emerged spontaneously and developed through interaction. We've tried to identify specific scent markers, behavioral triggers, even genetic factors that might explain his exceptional perception. But science doesn't always have immediate explanations for observed phenomena," Rivera finished. "Still, the documented outcomes are irrefutable." "Indeed," Howard agreed, "which is why we've shifted our research focus to the how rather than the why. Developing protocols that work with the abilities these special animals display, rather than trying to engineer them artificially." As afternoon sunlight filtered through new spring leaves, Howard found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From abandoned elder to institutional revolutionary, from isolated academic to community cornerstone, transformations as profound as they were unexpected. Melissa approached, clipboard in hand. Dr. Thornton, the new therapy dog candidates have arrived for assessment. Duke's expertise is requested. Howard nodded, preparing to follow her to the training area they had established in the facility's west wing. Alex, you're welcome to observe if you'd like. The selection process is quite illuminating. Rivera accepted eagerly, walking alongside Howard's wheelchair as Duke led the way with dignified purpose. I've been meaning to ask, Rivera said quietly as they moved through Pinecrest's bustling corridors. How did Duke come into the therapy program? Was he raised specifically for this work? Howard exchanged glances with Melissa, who smiled at the question. Actually, she replied, Duke was a rescue. Howard smiled, placing his hand on Duke's head in the familiar ritual that had come to symbolize their unlikely alliance. In that simple touch lay everything that mattered: respect, purpose, and the profound understanding that healing often comes from the most unexpected sources. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new opportunities to extend their work. But tonight, in the quiet garden under spring stars, it was enough to simply acknowledge the journey traveled and the lives transformed, a testament to resilience, connection, and the enduring power of recognition between kindred spirits. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment, I watched until here, and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's really emotional.